YouTube is filled with videos about the big countries, the rise of China, the fall of Britain, and the manifest destiny of America. It's easy to forget that most countries are really small, and they're getting smaller because of civil wars and independence movements. The goal of this video is to figure out how these small countries are able to compete, and to see if there are any strategies which can be imitated in games. Small countries are defined by their lack of power, and power comes in many forms, but we often think of it as military power. If we think of world politics as a competition, then smaller states with less power aren't very safe. They could be invaded and erased from the map. This concern is repeated by realists and ministers of defense across the world. Speak softly but carry a big stick. They advise small countries to prioritize protecting themselves. There are plenty of small countries which do this, and a lot of diversity between them. Switzerland, Serbia, Vietnam, North Korea, all of them are prepared to defend against bigger countries because they've had to in the past. However, there are also plenty of countries with weak militaries. Hell, some countries don't even have a military. There are plenty of diplomats and scholars that argue aggressive war is illegal, and that the world is becoming safer for newer and smaller countries. And if we look at the data, that might be true. There are more small countries today than there were in the past. I'm not going to tell you which opinion is correct. You need to decide that for yourself. Regardless of which view you take, small countries will need to work with larger ones on a variety of different issues. When I was doing research for this video, I read A Small State's Guide to World Influence by Tom Long. In the book, he created this simple method of describing issues and pairing them with strategies. I'm going to build on that method to make it more applicable to games and to suit my more cynical view of world politics. The first part of this method is creating a scorecard. The scorecard is used to describe the issue. There are 3 elements to it: policy divergence, issue salience, and preference cohesion. I'm going to rank each of these elements high or low, but first, let's explain what each of these elements mean. Policy divergence is when your solution is different than theirs. I'll use an example. Let's say there's an island between 2 countries. If they both want the island, then the policy divergence is high. If one of them wants the island and the other just wants to trade with it, then the policy divergence is low. Issue salience is when both parties care about the issue. Let's imagine that one of the countries in the example is at war. Winning the war is important, and the island is near the enemy, so the issue salience will be high. If the island is far away and it doesn't help them win the war, then the issue salience will be low. Preference cohesion is when the stakeholders in a country agree on the policy. The stakeholders are important people and groups that debate and make decisions. They include politicians, generals, big business, and even union leaders. Let's use the island example again. If they all believe taking the island helps the country and themselves, then preference cohesion is high. If half of them agree and half disagree, then preference cohesion is low. The second part of his method is assigning a strategy. I combined some of the tables to create a more comprehensive one, and I highlighted all my additions. The colors refer to different combinations of scorecard results. A is high and B is low. Red means policy divergence, issue salience, and preference cohesion is all high. Nothing will be accomplished in negotiations. There is no opportunity for the small country to get what it wants, and its only options are to persevere in the face of great adversity, or to do what the other party wants, but very slowly and poorly. Orange means policy divergence and issue salience is high, but preference cohesion is low. This usually happens when there's a crisis that shakes people's faith in their policy. There's a saying, every crisis is an opportunity, and you can take advantage of a crisis by redefining the problem, framing it differently. Yellow means policy divergence is high, but issue salience and preference cohesion is low. This is the best scenario for a small country. The big country is just doing what's convenient, and they don't care that much. All the small country has to do is get the bigger country's attention and give them a small push. It's not guaranteed the big country will do what they want, but it's more likely they'll make some concession. Green means policy divergence is low, but issue salience and preference cohesion is high. There's some opportunity. Both countries understand the problem and are trying to solve it. The best strategy is simply to find a mutually beneficial arrangement. Blue means policy divergence is low, issue salience is high, and preference cohesion is low. There's some opportunity here too. Both countries are trying to solve the problem, but they don't understand it in the same way. One of them might have more information than the other. In this scenario, the best strategy is extroversion. Extroversion caught my eye because it's a very unusual strategy, and it's not immediately apparent, what it is. Well, small countries pay more attention to large ones than vice versa, unless the larger one has an equally large diplomatic staff. Because of this, the small country can misrepresent itself to gain favor or look like it's being helpful. For example, if a great power is trying to promote democracy, then a small state can call itself a democracy and make lots of public speeches about it. This should improve relations between the two countries, so long as the great power doesn't investigate the claim. Extroversion isn't just misrepresentation, though. A small country can just highlight the good things by increasing their publicity, and downplay the bad by reducing it. Violet means policy divergence is high, issue salience is low, and preference cohesion is high. There's no opportunity here. The status quo is supported by vested interests. The best strategy is to change the agenda, or find new solutions which work with, rather than against, those interests. White means policy divergence is low, issue salience is low, and preference cohesion is high. This is another low opportunity scenario. However, both parties are satisfied with the status quo being maintained, and they'll only negotiate small parts of it. There'll be some haggling to get the best deal. Gray means policy divergence is low, issue salience is low, and preference cohesion is low. There is opportunity here, but this time it's a bad thing. Neither party wants to change the status quo, but over time that might happen by accident. The small country will have to put effort into maintaining the status quo, but not so much that the larger state believes it has leverage over them. And here is where I diverge from Tom Long most dramatically. There are two other scenarios, maroon and black. Maroon means policy divergence is high, issue salience is high, and preference cohesion is high. This is like red, but there is one big difference. The conflict is over key interests. Key interests are strategically important, inflexible, and necessary for the survival of the state or maintaining its relative power. In this scenario, the small state has to align with the rival of the bigger state, or if they are allied to the bigger state, they have to defect, or threaten to defect, to a rival. However, no matter what they do, it's unlikely things will go their way. Black also means policy divergence is high, issue salience is high, and preference cohesion is high. The difference here is that the conflict is over key interests that can only be resolved by force. These are typically key interests where immediate action is needed. There is actually more opportunity here than you would expect. I would classify it as medium opportunity. War is chaotic, and it's never clear who's going to win until the chips are down. Small states are willing to pay a heavy price for their survival, and if the war doesn't end quickly, the smaller state may get concessions as time goes on. The great power isn't just concerned with the smaller state, it's also concerned with the other great powers. If it spends blood and treasure fighting the small state, it can't use that elsewhere to protect other key interests. I'm sure you've heard people describe big countries being stuck in a war or a region. And with that, we've completed the table. This system for managing relations with other states is really interesting. Tom Long's book was descriptive, with lots of case studies, but the system he created is prescriptive. That's not unusual. There's lots of prescriptive theories in international relations. However, there's also a wariness about them. It's hard to predict the future, and the world is so complicated that a theory will never provide the perfect solution. The best solution is the one that suits the situation, and sounds best after you've heard all the others. And with that in mind, this book and this system rests on a single element, which is necessary for the success of small countries. Information. Knowledge is power. If you know your enemy, and your friends, and those who call you stranger, you need not fear dealing with them. Without knowing what the great powers care about, why they care, and how much they care, then a small state will never know how to deal with them. The small states that I'm confident will continue to survive are the ones that are constantly learning and have already lived a long time, by accident or design, because effort cannot entirely replace experience. And so to all those small countries fighting for their place in the world, or peacefully pursuing one, I wish them the best in surviving to the next century. And that's where I plan to end the video, but I've done so much research that I actually want to touch on some other strategies, such as economic specialization, regional integration, cultural diplomacy, participation in international organizations, and multilateral treaties. Each of them probably warrants a video of its own, but for now I'll just try and touch on them. Economic specialization is the strategy you'll be most familiar with. Some countries are blessed with natural resources which they can use to get influence over larger states. Saudi Arabia is the poster child of this strategy. 80% of its export income and 40% of its GDP comes from oil. They produce 12% of the world's oil, but only make up a 1/200th of its population. There are also territories which aren't as blessed with natural resources, but still find a way to specialize. Chinese Taipei, more commonly known as Taiwan, fills a very important and strategic niche in the global economy. According to The Economist, they produce 60% of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of the most advanced ones. If either of those countries take a day off work, then prices will go to the moon. Regional integration is kinda complicated, but it's very common. The best example is probably the European Union. For 1,000 years, then the great powers of Europe were constantly fighting with one another. And in the wake of the world wars, they decided to integrate their economies to discourage that. A single currency, joint institutions, overarching laws, and a freedom of movement. It would be very hard for Germany to invade France with that much cooperation. But nothing is impossible. Cultural diplomacy is also quite complicated. I could mention that K-pop is bringing attention to South Korea, or that the Gulf states are buying soccer teams, or how the United States media and social platforms have brought it together. I could do that. Or I could mention Japan. Half of the world associates Japan with anime, and the cutest and cuddliest characters in the world. The other half associates Japan with man-made horrors beyond comprehension. In each case, their culture is more well-known than their history, and this allows them to influence the populations of other countries, and by extension, their politicians and their policies. Participation in international organizations conveys a few benefits. Firstly, if a state is recognized as a member of the United Nations, it is much safer, and they gain a lot of prestige at home and abroad. Secondly, small states can vote in these organizations. Sometimes their vote is equal to states that are 100 times larger than them, which is kinda ridiculous. However, when that's not the case and their vote doesn't really matter, they can still sell it for a premium. And finally, international organizations provide an opportunity to work with other small countries. One country can be ignored. 100 countries can still be ignored, but it takes more effort. Multilateral treaties are useful for the same reasons as international organizations. The reason they're distinct is because they stand in contrast to bilateral treaties. A bilateral treaty is between two countries, and the outcome is based on their bargaining power. A multilateral treaty is between lots of countries, and the small countries can pool their bargaining power to get a better deal. And that's everything. I hope you enjoyed both parts of the video. If you think I missed something or I got something wrong, then let me know in the comments below. This is the first time I'm venturing into real politics, so we'll see how it goes. Thank you for watching.